when we meditate, we're essentially undoing what the mind constantly wants to do, which is to weave and construct newer and newer stories that add to the delusion that we can call our lives or life. The mind loves to make stories, to weave stories, to deal with stories. What oftentimes you might have heard me say or use the term content to describe that function of the mind, to both build content out of scratch, as well as want to deal with content that comes at us from everywhere, from the six sense doors. Essentially, the Salāyatana, or the six sense spheres, they are the bringers of more and more content. And the mind loves to manufacture things that could have gone either way. Either they could have just dropped where they were at the door of that particular sense sphere without being allowed to turn into anything other than what it was. Let's say just a sound, remaining a sound, and that's the end of the story. Or typically turn into something nonstop, churning and building and weaving, and what in the Majjhima Sutta, Lord Buddha calls the seamstress for craving, that comes and attaches itself. Sutures, it stitches things together. Here's the internal base, meaning the organ, if you want to call it that, like the eye. And then you have the object which the eye captures, sees. But then there is consciousness, vijnana, or the sense awareness. Instead of looking at it as something naturally occurring, it likes to come in and add another flavor or stitch up this minus, my hyphen ness, I hyphen ness, I-ness, this belongs to me, or denoting a relationship between I and you over there, this thing over there, this sound over there. It just got stitched up like a seamstress or like a tailor, patching things up, putting things together. All of a sudden you have an item of clothing. And you can have a relationship with that. In other words, a story with that. So life, in essence, is just a bundle of stories, just constantly being brought in. It's almost like an unfinishing, never to be resolved type of a mathematical problem, if you want to think of it like that, where we're always trying to resolve matters, issues. We're trying to sedate, we're trying to suppress the fires at the six sense doors. And that is what we also bring to the meditation cushion. And that's one of the reasons why many of us shun the meditation cushion, the meditation room, the meditation building, whatever it is, where we will be sitting with it to observe the mind. The mind which is always picking up things, holding on to things. Earlier this week, I was mentioning to a student how out of the 6 senses, the 5 don't have the capacity to hold on to their objects. The eyes, or the eye, cannot hold on to sights, to colors. It cannot hold on to them. The ears the same way. The ears cannot hold on to sound. You're listening to some car screeching or Tchaikovsky playing and or Mozart or something, and all of a sudden you want to grab hold of it, but it's not the ear that's grabbing hold of those notes. The screeching, the yelling, the dogs barking. The ear's job is done at that moment. Boom. It picked up those sounds. That's it. The same with taste buds. The same with your olfactory senses, your nose, smelling things. Same with the body. That's why we want to go back and retouch something, to recapture some of the thing which just got registered. What was that? Let me listen carefully. Let me hit replay. Or let me go back to that restaurant where they have this very delicious dessert. Let me watch that. Let me do a double take. Let me just look at that attractive person, attractive thing, that beautiful sunset. It's not the eyes, you know. It's not the ears, it's not the nose, the tongue, the body. It is the mind. The manufacturer of stories, the lover of contents. Always, always seeking to build upon previously held notions about the world, which is completely diluted. Why? How can we be so sure that it is diluted? Because there is this thing called anicca, impermanence, which means the story that I held so dear to my heart, as true, as legitimate, factual, sometime later it will be completely lopsided, changed, altered. And the biggest story is the one you see when you look in the mirror. Your face, your body, your images, plural, of yourself, how you look at your personhood, the self-identification, or atta, that Lord Buddha presented us with the opposite of anatta. It's not that there is no self. The Buddha never said that. It is this identification, this turning into a personality, which means that there's something solid here, that is something unchanging. The story. But even a story changes, has to change, otherwise it's just, you have to constantly present a new version of it. I remember when I used to, when I was a child, I used to be fascinated with my grandmother's stories. And I would notice over time, year after year, her ability to tell stories would, she wouldn't have the patience as she did, let's say, a year prior, or usually it was the case where she would forget. She would forget. So I had to remind her of, some characters' names that I had learned from her, of course. And I would notice how whenever she got bored of telling a story, and I would just nag her, Grandma, please, please tell me another story, please. She would just start weaving another version of the story, just like as if it turns into a tangent. But it's the same story, it's the same character. All of a sudden, she starts constructing, suturing, stitching another new thread of a storyline. But I didn't care. I loved it. I loved the direction of the story. All of a sudden, it's like I was engaged with it, caught in the maze. So I would have this, I would develop this relationship with these characters that she would come up with. The plot lines or the plot points, these moments of crises that would happen in the story, all of a sudden, that got me excited. Now I'm curious. And then right at the pinnacle, right at that moment, she would say, oh, I have to go and fix you guys dinner or something. I was like, Grandma, it's okay. Just finish the story. We love stories. Because it takes less responsibility. It is like being in the passenger seat. You don't do anything, you just sit there. I know people, students in the past, who love to go on retreats, meditation retreats. And when you speak to them, when you ask them certain questions, you see that most of those chunks of time, even though they might have spent hours in a day sitting on a cushion, they have no clue what they were doing. It was just like a dead zone. It was just, they were basically passengers. Some of them would come and say, oh, yes, I was in cessation. Yes, Bhante, I was in cessation. No. We were lost. One hand was holding the hand of sloth, the other one was holding the hand of torpor, laziness, and just absent-mindedness or lethargy. We must be alert. We have to see these nuances. It's very engaged work. When we talk about the 7 factors of awakening, there's 7 of them, you know? And Lord Buddha says, without using the 7 factors of awakening, forget it. Nibbana is not possible. Now, how it presents itself, for example, pasadhi, how it represents the tranquility of mind, or vidya, or even piti, the joy factor, however they might present themselves, they might come in from a different angle where we might not recognize them as elements or aspects of the 7 factors, as the sattva bhujangas, for example. It doesn't matter, but they're there. But wisdom has to be present, whether we know it or not. Wisdom is the thing that connects us with reality and says, hey, what are you doing? You're sitting in the passenger seat. Get over here. Get behind the wheel. That is wisdom, by the way. That is panya. That is Dhamma vichaya, the investigative aspect of the mind that says, okay, now I'm in charge. 10 and 2, 10 and 2. 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock on the steering wheel. I'm in control. I know what I'm doing. Okay, we're back on the saddle. I know what's happening, what I'm supposed to do, which is not to force, first and foremost. Not to force. Force, that is, to make things happen. Because that is also a subtle version of building up a story. Now you're trying to add content. Because there's already enough going on. You don't have to add anything further. Let's say your body sends out a signal to you and says, hey, you're behind, your butt's getting numb, or there's incredible pain. Yeah, you can go ahead and ignore, or you could use it because it pulled you out of whatever tranquility, let's say, you were experiencing. Suddenly there's this jolt, there's this agitation. What do I do with it? I can suppress it, which is typically what most of us do initially. And then there's the contrast, the compare and contrast that comes in. Well, I'm not supposed to have this. I'm supposed to be a meditator. Come on, I sit for an hour or so I should be beyond this. What is this? This is embarrassing. I'm glad no one's inside my head to see what's going on. Etc. Stories. Versus pull yourself out of that narrative, that dialogue or monologue, whatever you want to call it, and just observe this. Today, before you sat, some of you, when you were here, I mentioned how it is important for us when we're listening to someone. We put most of the focus on our inner responses or even reactions to whatever it is that we're listening to. So essentially, don't listen to them. Listen to what's going on with you, within you, in your heart. What are you doing with whatever input is coming? And this is another version of what I was just saying earlier about our relationship with the sixth sense doors. Because we're too involved, we're too engaged with whatever is coming, whatever content is spewing in through these cracks in the sixth sense spheres. We're just dying to turn them into stories. Years ago, when I was trying out this memory technique that I was learning, and basically, some of you or most of you probably have heard about this. Basically, series of different names or totally disconnected from each other, but just a series of things that get to be listed. Now, the presenter was saying the word, if I write the word in letters, let's say elephant, what comes to mind? The actual letters, or when I say the word actually? Elephant. Do you see the letters E-L-E-P-H-A-F? No, you see an elephant. So the brain will respond to it immediately through imagery, in most cases, if not all. So similarly, whatever terms that, let's say you're looking down a list of names. So the trick was basically, from what I recall, it's a memory game, were just to add imagery to it, each of these terms. So you would have, I don't know, some marbles attached to whatever it might be, umbrella, and then you would have, let's say, the elephant sitting on the umbrella, something like that. So no one has to know, you will know this, and they might have for you 76 different items. Now, because you used imagery, your mind will remember the images because of the stories that it built around each of these terms or things. And suddenly, to your surprise, you will be able to list 76 items in order. And when I first tried this, it just blew my mind. The next thing I did was basically I went to my junior high, was it, or high school students. And there was like 40 people, and it was like my first class that I was teaching, and I had not known them. So they came in, so I was just like went with every single student. And then after the whole thing was done, I got almost like 90-some% right. And that was a good bonding experience. Because in my mind, I used that because I added stories. Now, this is not something unique to one person here. No, this is something that the brain loves to do, story building. But we're doing this constantly. With sounds. We have a list of obnoxious sound files in our head. And it's a closet full of obnoxious things, things that we dislike. And in fact, when you're getting to introduce yourself to someone, you list those. So what are your likes? Oh, I love this, but I hate that. The problem is we are lost in this love and hate relationship, when all we have to do is just keep the windows open and let the breeze come in and out. That is what the instruction was to Bahiya, if you remember. When you are seeing Bahiya, let there just be the seen, the thing that is being seen. When you're hearing something, don't invest, don't be sucked into it. Have an identification, a relationship with it. Just see it. Now, this is obviously easier said than done. So if these are the 5 senses which cannot hold on to any of their objects, the mind is the problem. That's where the manana or imagining takes place, the story building, papanchas. And because we have a constant flow of sankharas, which are basically our karmic inclinations, habitual tendencies, I like to call them, or generative causes, the things, the prompting. It's like those ripple effects that it started because of our actions, meaning those pebbles that we had thrown into the middle of the lake, they come to us and they will never end. Never. Unless the mind understands what is going on, what is taking place. So it is the relationship that needs to be changed. And that relationship, the way I understand it, is what Lord Buddha described as wisdom, panya. Because ultimately the mind is the thing which complicates things. We don't need to complicate things. That's what I'm trying to say. Yesterday, I gave a talk here at the Buddhist Mahavihara, and the talk that I gave on was Tipitaka, which is the T means 3, Pitaka means baskets. So in Theravada Buddhism, we have the 3 baskets. Think of it as the branches, the library of material. where one pitaka is, or one basket is the grouping of all the suttas, the discourses. The next one is the Vinaya, which are the discipline or the code of conduct, typically for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. But it's more than that, because you have chunks and chunks of discourses there. So you have a lot of Dhamma there as well, not just in the suttas. And then, to the surprise of the listeners, I said, well, actually the Tipitaka is not supposed to be Tipitaka, because it's supposed to be Dvipitaka, because Lord Buddha never taught the third one. The third one being the Abhidhamma Pitaka, the treatise of all this mental, psychological decipherings and philosophical renderings of what the mind is, what it does, complications upon complications. At one point, you even have to do some math in your head. It's vast. It's an ocean. And if you're very much into intellectual acrobatics, that is the field to jump into. But I have never met anyone, nor have I heard of anyone who has attained arahantship or even the sotapanna stage thanks to having studied the Abhidhamma. Now, why do I bring this? Because Lord Buddha taught the Dhamma that is beautiful in the beginning, beautiful and simple in the middle, and beautiful and simple in the end. It shouldn't be so difficult. We make it difficult with all the mental jargon that we regurgitate constantly without looking at what is happening. So if we just use the 6 sense spheres, the Salāyatana, you have everything you need. You have everything you need. Just observe. At the moment of arising, at the moment of contact, can your mindfulness be sharp enough to detect something that the eyes just caught? Can mindfulness be there? When you felt that twitch on your left side, let's say, as you were sitting, which is bodily sensation, right? Immediately before you went into story building mode, could you just capture that right at that moment of arising? And if we do, just like when months ago when we did the Anapanasati Sutta, the body of the breath, if you recall, the beginning of the breath, the middle portion of the breath as it persists, and the ending of the breath. It's the same thing with the sensations, because the breath is a sensation, obviously, if you're aware of it. Similarly with the bodily sensation here, now it's not the breath, it is a painful or whatever feeling, but it is a feeling. It is, boom, there's a contact, hassa. Can I be there at that moment, quickly? And the moment you are there, with sati, that means yoniso manasikara. That means wise attention. The mind doesn't have a chance to turn it into a story, because you're there, you're like sitting like this, watching it. If you will, the mind gets self-conscious. When I was doing apprenticing, actually, being a jeweler when I was about 12 or something, 12, 13, my brother was showing me how to solder gold. You know, you heat it up with thing, and you're using like a old-fashioned pump. So it's like a bellow, and you have a container which has the gasoline. So you have tubes going in, so you're pumping all that, and the gasoline is coming out through this thing that you're holding with a gauge. So it's the flames are coming from there, and you're holding it with a set of tweezers in the other hand as you are controlling the pieces of gold to be soldered in a certain way, just to melt the tip of one piece of gold to attach it to the next, maybe to make a ring, shorter, smaller, or, whatever. So I would notice my brother come and have his head right next to me or watch me. It was just like, if I'm doing it right. I was like, could you please stand aside? I'm becoming extremely self-conscious. I can't do this. It's like that. When you're observing the mind, or just any of the six sense doors, like the hearing, listening, just listening, watching what the ears are going to do. They can't do anything because they can't hold to sound, right? It's the mind that comes in and says, do you mind stepping aside because I'm about to build something here with the sound, have a relationship with this, say, I hate this sound, or it sounds exactly like this beautiful melody that I experienced somewhere in my past or would like to experience. So slowly, the mind realizes that the jig is up. It's caught. There's less and less delusion taking place. Now, many people get silently terrified, perhaps, when they think, oh, you mean to say there's not going to be stories, meaning there's not going to be anything fun. It's like that child, grandmother, was telling me the story, and I was feeling so excited. So you've taken that away from me. Many people start thinking. That's not it. Because there's so much happening. Every sense door is bringing us information. It keeps us fresh. Suddenly, anicca really becomes real. That's the real movie, not the stories that we make. The real life is taking place at the six sense doors. It's fresh. The next time you're battling with Sila, for example, with the 5 precepts, just observe how much action is going on, especially when you're being, quote unquote, tempted to do something that you don't want to do. And the moment you have that handled, suddenly, almost a millisecond later, there's a new object that the mind comes and says, how about this? How about, can we do this? How about this? This isn't as bad as that. Meanwhile, they're all connected. Now, instead of being sucked into the story, just observing all this drama taking place. One time, Lord Buddha actually gets out of his evening meditation, and he approaches a Dhamma hall in one of the monasteries he was staying at. And whenever he came into a room, he would just announce himself, like he would clear his throat or something, He would never just barge in, even though it's Lord Buddha, king of the Dhamma. He would always be respectful as to whoever it was inside. Maybe they might have been talking and he interrupted them. So he goes, he approaches and he finally is inside the hall and everybody's paying homage to him. And he sees that Venerable Ananda was sitting and addressing the bhikkhus. And he asks Ananda, what was the conversation that I walked into and interrupted? And he says, Ananda says, Bhante, I was mentioning to the students, the bhikkhus, the wonderful and marvelous qualities of Lord Buddha, the Tathagata. and the teacher. And he says, I was listing all the qualities and the miraculous things that have taken place before his birth, during his birth. And so he lists them all. So it's in the long discourses. That's why it's long, because initially you see the sutta where Venerable Ananda is going through all the list, and then Lord Buddha comes in and he repeats it. And Lord Buddha approves it, and he adds a few others. And he says, in that case, Ananda, you need to also add these miraculous and wonderful qualities of the Tathagata. And one might expect, oh, some miraculous, something out of this world, really, outlandish, maybe something. And he says the Tathagata knows thoughts when they just arise. He knows the thoughts, he sees the thoughts as they are persisting, and he sees the thoughts as they fade away. Also, he says, Ananda, you should remember this special, miraculous, and wonderful quality of the Tathagata, he says. When the Tathagata sees perceptions or memories start, or mental associations arising, he sees them at that point. He sees them as they remain, persist, and he sees them as they are extinguished, fade away. And he says, remember this third miraculous and wonderful quality of the Tathagata. The Tathagata is one who sees feeling as it arises, whatever kind of feeling, as it remains, persists, and as it fades away, dies down. If you just heard this, walking off the street, it's like, so what's so special about it? Try it. And after you get the hang of it, that's why we meditate. To see these things, because if we are able to even do one of these three miraculous deeds, then it means that the six sense doors, the gates, the spheres are under our control. We're aware. That is practicing Mahasati. That is practicing Mahapanya. Great mindfulness, great Panya. Which means you're always holding the hand of Sati. It's never slipping through your hands, through your fingers. The awareness, the full awareness of where your body is placed in this time and space. It's very much like being in a battle. Especially if imagine yourself in medieval times or feudal times, and maybe the image that comes to mind is somewhere in Japan, for example, and it's samurai. There's a lot of blades out, swords out, very sharp, moving and slashing through things. You have to be careful. Your fingers are not flailing around, your limbs are next to you. You're very carefully using as a soldier. That's what they would have to do. Otherwise, they're going to end up walking, or if they can walk away from such a horrific scene with limbs missing. That's what's happening most of the time. Whenever we are unaware, meaning without sati with us, we're flailing our arms throughout our days, totally clueless, lost in our stories. That's the battleground. And then we come to our room, a familiar place, a familiar face, and that becomes our kind of grounding, because we find ourselves back into a familiar territory and say, Okay, so this, I can relax now. But we could have relaxed throughout the day, in the midst of the hubbub, in the midst of the noise of the day, whatever, however it might have been turning out to be during the day, if we had sati present. Because to miss that opportunity really makes us feel empty, not in a good way, empty. You know, we feel like we missed out. We feel we're missing out. Oh, next time I'll have a better chance. Next time I'll, you know, tomorrow. And tomorrow comes, and so we need to use sati to keep looking at these gates. Remember, the 5 gates, the 5 sensory perceptions that we have, the 5 senses, they will not be able to hold on to things, their objects. It's the mind. I think it was last week or the week prior, I was mentioning how Ajahn Mun was known to say he only practices one precept, and that is the one that matters the most, which is the mind. Keeping an eye on the mind constantly, never letting go of the mind. Because he said, if you have kept the precept of watching, observing the mind, keeping it virtuous, meaning always having Mahapanya, Mahasati on it, it's impossible for you to break any precepts. Impossible. It doesn't work. Because mind is everything. Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. Mano Setha Manomaya. The first verse of the Dhammapada. Mind is the forerunner of all states. Mind is chief. Mind-made are they. Everything. Because the moment that we take the bite of an image, a color, a sound, we have taken the bite and we have turned it into a mind object, because now it has turned into a concept, a content for the mind to chew on, to build stories with. It's no longer in the hands of the eyes. The eyes are done. They just picked it up at that moment. It's the mind that takes these mind objects and tries to make something out of them. Constantly, constantly, constantly. So not being so sticky-fingered with these mind objects, seeing them for what they are, not falling for the stories that the mind keeps telling us, remembering, recalling, to bringing it to mind. How did you start again, mind object? How did this scene start? Oh, I just had seen an object which reminded me of some memory in the past, and now I'm strangled by it. It has turned into my noose. How did it start again? You see this a lot in psychotherapy sessions where a person comes in and they are completely lost in anger or depression. And when you trace back, what happened before? What happened before? And then you find out that it was something that they heard, a love song. Suddenly they are in the clutches of extreme pain, heartache, anguish, remembering how it felt when they were with their significant other in the, you know. How did it start? They went back to the passenger seat and they were lost, moping and lost in just convulsions with these memories that doesn't, you know, help in any way. But had the sati been there, they would have detected it right at the moment of arising. Because feelings are going to keep coming. Thoughts are going to keep coming. So long as you have the 5 aggregates, they're going to come. Perceptions are going to come. It doesn't mean that the Arahant walks around and there's nothing happening. They have no feelings. They're not zombies. But whenever there is a feeling, they're aware of the feeling as it's rising up, as it's at its point of origin, and they're watching it carefully. And right at that arising is their nirodha. That's where it ceases immediately. It doesn't even last. It doesn't even like go into, I was pointing out, like breaking it down into the 3 phases. Lord Buddha was actually giving it to us in small bite chunks so that we can actually understand. But essentially, when you see the moment of its arising, it's done. It ceases at that point. That's what turns it into Mahasati. That's what turns it into Mahapanya. Because the mind doesn't have a chance to build a story. That's why Lord Buddha says, this path is for one who whose mind no longer makes papanchas. Nippapancha, the term is. It just constantly dissolves. As it rises, boom, it falls back because the mind is there. It's like curious. Just dissolves, melts, melts, melts. But it doesn't mean that the thoughts don't come or feelings don't come in. But what do you do with it? If you recall some time ago when I was talking about Venerable Sariputta, I mentioned it several times because it's a lovely story, but I'm not going to tell the story because I've said it so many times. But he, when he was hit from the back by someone, a Brahmin who wanted to test his compassion and forgiveness, tolerance, and he didn't respond. I mean, he just got shaken up and it just like, and then the man comes pouring, crying. He says, I'm sorry, Bhante, this and that. And Venerable Sariputta immediately forgives him. It doesn't mean that he didn't feel that hit, that strike on his back. It doesn't mean that. He felt it. But what did he do? He was there at the moment of the feeling being registered in his sensory perception. He's alive, What does he do with that? That is the distinguishing aspect of a person who is an arahant and who is not. And that is what we're working towards. Every moment of sati, you're taking yourself closer to experiencing that freedom. Not bad, eh? As they say. So keep an eye out for these 6 senses. They are gateways also, not just for content, but they are also gateways for nibbana. You've heard me use the hindrances, the nivarana, not to be seen as our enemies, but as our instructors, as our teachers, showing us where our attachments are. Similarly, with the 6 sense doors, they could turn into, in the hands of someone who's wisely applying themselves, they could turn into gateways for nibbana. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions, thoughts about the practice, about the Dhamma, what was shared. Hopefully it's helpful to you and your practice. Well, if there aren't any questions, we can just, let me check here if there's, oh yeah, no, nothing. Let us then share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear struck be fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits of ours that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas and yaksas and kumbhandas of mighty power share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May the triple gem bless you all and your loved ones. May your practice progress. May you remind yourselves not to force yourselves, your effort. Just use the right amount of effort and pull away when you notice that it's getting too hot, too intense. And please, please remind yourselves not to approach the work, this work, and approach you as if you're trying to fix somebody who's broken, because you're not. Because that is oftentimes seen in practitioners as if you're trying to fix something, an unfixable oftentimes thing or a person. That's not healthy. That is not true. That is not true. That is actually a wrong view. So when I suggest to approach it with love and tolerance and kindness and allowance and remembering the good that you've done, that you do, the goodness, innate goodness within you, starting from that, remind yourself of it. When you notice that you've drifted away, drifted off, just your meditation object or your sati is not there. Maybe it's not been there for hours or days. That's okay. Now it is because you just became aware of it. That's huge. That's big. That's enough to celebrate to yourself and say, oh, okay, it's okay. I'm okay. Let me go back behind the wheel and carefully continue. Get yourself back on the saddle and go easy on yourself. Practicing sila, samadhi, panya. Yeah. Until next time, be well. Well, next week we'll do the sutta. I have no idea what sutta will be, but we'll let you know prior to that. Be well. May the triple gem bless you. Sukhi Hotu.